Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined by my guest, Heather Augustyn. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tom.
We're here to discuss women in Jamaican music, and Heather has two accomplishments under her belt. She has done some extensive research and created the Heather Augustyn Collection at the Archives of African American Culture and Music at Indiana University in Bloomington, and she published a book last year called Women in Jamaican Music. So tell us about the years of work that you did assembling this collection that you have now.
Sure. So since about 1995, I've been interviewing people who have been involved in Jamaican music, specifically ska music. And ska is what came before reggae. It's a form of jazz.
Now, that's interesting because I think most of us in America heard about reggae before we heard about ska, and so I know I was under the impression that it came second, but actually it didn't. So.
Well, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And so, but this was the music that it became popular in America in the mid-1990s, so that's probably what led to that perception too. But I started interviewing people, and I had a lot of interviews on micro cassette tapes. That was my method, and I used it until actually quite recently, when I could get them at Radio Shack, no longer. And so I had all of these, dozens and dozens of interviews on micro cassette tape. And so I was...
And you were interviewing the musicians, the producers, anybody involved in the music industry, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And, over the years, many of these people had passed away. Many had left the business, but their stories, I think, were really important to preserve. And so I donated them, dozens of them, as well as a number of other artifacts and ephemera to the Archives of African American Music and Culture at Indiana University. And they established a collection in my name, which was really surprising and
That's
humbling.
An honor,
yeah, but I think what it is you might say, well, what does Jamaica have to do with the African American? And it's all music of the diaspora, and so they were interested in establishing more collections of the diaspora.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's kind of unique if you're studying music that there's this very distinct kind of music that comes out of a very small area, right, and has influenced music all over the world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one little island, like you say, and they've given us 7 distinct genres.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything from mento, I'm going to try to test myself here, mento, ska, rock steady, certainly reggae, dub, dance hall, and one more that's escaping my memory right now.
That's a pretty good list, though, yeah.
It is, for one small country. And like you said, it really has spread all over the world. You could walk into a Walmart and find a Bob Marley t-shirt, and that's thanks to, Jamaica's contribution.
Yeah. Well, so in the course of your doing this research, you came to some conclusions about the role of women in the process, and about how women were also portrayed in the lyrics, right?
Right. Yeah. So women, I think it's not specific to Jamaican music, but I mean, women played kind of a secondary or tertiary role. They were relegated to backup singers and maybe even like the secretaries in the studio that are doing kind of the paperwork, if there was any paperwork. But when I started investigating, the women in Jamaican music, I found there were a lot more than I realized, and there were some pretty important women, without which, the culture, the music would be very, very different. So I found that they have a pretty important role, and so that's why I decided to produce a book on this. There's 500 books written about Bob Marley, but there have been none written on the women. So I thought we need a book on the women.
That tells us something, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the women, I'm sure, were very influential.
They were.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of Bob Marley performing live after the Wailers, when it was Bob Marley, he had his 3 backup singers. And we can picture them in their scarves and the dresses, and they really helped to give a fuller, more harmonious sound. So they enhanced his music, definitely.
Did he ever acknowledge them in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Well, he was married to one of them. So
okay,
yeah, but it was the I3s. That was the name, and it was Marcia Griffiths It was his wife, Rita Marley, and then Judy Mowat. And they were all artists in their own right. Marcia Griffiths has gone on to, great fame, especially in Jamaica. I mean, she's revered as one of the greatest musicians that the island has produced. So yeah, Bob Marley certainly did respect them very much.
The population of Jamaica can't be that big. It's kind of, it reminds me of Liverpool. You look at Liverpool in the 1960s, and it produced so many musicians. There were still musicians in the early 70s that were coming out of Liverpool that were contemporary with the Beatles.
Absolutely, and quite a few ska musicians too that came out of the British incarnation of ska. So
and that was what?
About 1979, 1978, 1979. And it lasted till about 1983.
But there is an influence of Jamaican music on British music actually earlier than that, because you've got the Kinks.
And then certainly, Obladi, Oblada, the Beatles.
No, I didn't know that, really?
Yeah, that is, and there was that was an attempt at the Jamaican ska, which was popular in 1964, in England. Millie Small, one of the women that I look at in this book.
My Boy Lollipop.
Right, you got it, yep. Yeah. And she really made ska, put kind of Jamaica on the map, and she's one of the women that I look at in this book. But she popularized ska, and it was, kind of a pop version of it. Yeah. But it made some people look deeper, and they investigated the roots of it.
So then it really came into its own in the 90s, then you're saying, right?
Well, it did and it didn't. So the original Jamaican musicians in the 90s and even in the 80s during the British incarnation, the original Jamaican artists became popular again. And so new audiences looked at them and celebrated them. But then the American ska was pretty different, and there were a lot of different versions of American ska too. So some of it was kind of bad, and then some of it was, very traditional, and they were very talented musicians.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of them.
That sounds great.
You mentioned in your book Janet Enright, I think.
Janet Enright, yeah. You have to understand, in the 1950s in Jamaica, to be a musician was very difficult, because a musician was looked down upon. They were kind of the downtown. It sounds to me like
everybody was a musician in Jamaica at that point.
Well, at this time, proper people were not musicians. Okay. No, it was lowbrow. Yeah. And to be a woman in music was even looked down upon even more. Now, Janet Enright was a proper lady. She was upper class. She was well-bred. She came from money. And so
educated.
Very. And so she was playing guitar, but she was playing for, the prime minister at lunches in his backyard and things like that. But when she went to go play downtown with...
Now, downtown where?
Literally downtown Kingston. And so it was, a bit dodgy. Mm-hmm. And so when she would play down there with the recognized bands of the day, big orchestras, big band orchestras, she was still young, and there was one time when she was playing, and her father found out, because she was not supposed to be doing this. And she was very talented. She was self-taught and took lessons. Yeah. But when he showed up and she was performing on stage, she's playing a solo, and there's no sound coming out of her amp. And she turns around, and her father had unplugged the amp, and he said, "Little girl, you're going home with me," and he pulled her off stage. So, but she persevered, and she ended up leading her own orchestra. She had the Janet Enright combo.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned she was in Kingston. Does most of this generate in and around Kingston?
Absolutely. Almost 100%. Anything else that's taking place in any of the North Shore Island towns like Montego Bay and Ocho Rios, and those are just hotels, and they're playing for tourists there. But they're still going back and forth.
The scene's in Kingston.
The scene's in Kingston, that's where they live.
Have you been there, I assume?
About 5 times,
Five times, okay. Well, so that was Janet Enright. Another one you wrote about was Adina Edwards.
Right. She was blind, and she played the accordion. She was a musician on the street, basically panhandling for some money, and had been, singing kind of, traditional songs, and she was discovered. I guess that's how you get discovered.
Yeah.
She was discovered on the streets of Kingston by Byron Lee, who was a big record producer and also a band leader. And so he thought, boy, she's really got some talent, and so he recorded her. And after that, she had somewhat of a career in gospel. So she played gospel. Now, if you do go to Kingston today, you will see her actual accordion that is on display at the Jamaican Music Museum in downtown Kingston. So
she's
you
been,
can see that.
Yeah, she's been remembered
Right.
for that at least. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's interesting you said she was playing on the street.
Right.
Were there others who came up like that?
There were, yeah, especially because they wanted to try to make a living and get a recording contract. So they literally play on the street, try to be heard, line up at the studio for their shot. I mean, there would be lines outside of the studios where they would just hear them one after the other.
No kidding. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So it's really a short circuiting of the process that we have in the United States then by a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's. And if they weren't good enough, the producer would say, you know what, you're sounding a little bit rough. Why don't you come back in a year?
Yeah, interesting.
And sure enough, they would.
So in the course of doing all of this work, you started making some observations about how women were portrayed by the men in their music.
Right.
And I thought that's sort of an interesting categorization that you came up with. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I think part of it hit me when I'm driving along and I'm singing along to the songs and everything, and then I stop and I think, what am I singing? Because sometimes the lyrics are, they're kind of shocking, but it's not, again, unique to Jamaican music. Right. So I took a look at the lyrics and I decided to, I used an existing category that had been established of, song lyrics that were maybe admonishing or warning women, like be careful, stay away from this kind of guy, and I'll protect you, and those kind of songs. Other ones that are maybe breakup songs that are, you'll be sorry one day, that you didn't. Others that are warning men about, Jezebels or, women. So I took a look
just
at
remember
some of
she
it.
said that to me. She says, I love you, just remember she said that to me. That's a zombie song,
Oh,
I think,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so,
Yeah.
and it's funny because the American rhythm and blues style was what the Jamaicans were idolizing and borrowing from.
Right.
So a lot of these, tropes that, are similar. But I took a look at it, and some of them are, and some of them in later years got pretty lewd too. So there was a lot of innuendo and things like that came from the mento tradition. But it's just, I thought it was interesting. We're in a different context now, so we really can't. I didn't want to cast any judgment.
Right.
I just wanted to look at it and say, here's some examples of this sort of lyric. And then I took a look at some of the song lyrics that women were singing, and they were pretty different. Also kind of similar too. I mean, women warn other women too, these boots are made for walking kind of songs. So, but it was fun. Yeah, it was fun.
And so what kinds of themes did you find in the women's music?
Well, I mean, so some of the women's music, they're sweet love songs, like kind of especially the boy-girl duets, they're very sweet and kind of follow that tradition of, maybe being demure at first, like where the boy is kind of saying, I'm going to make you mine, and she's like, I don't want to, respond to you, and I'm going to walk away, and those kind of songs that were popular. But in later years, when women became more empowered, like through the 60s, a lot of the songs are women warning other women about, the men who are no good.
Sisters warning their sisters.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a Jamaican persona, character that shows up in songs?
Absolutely, yeah. And so there are some characters, like in Jamaican songs, there's the one character that actually has a tradition, and his name is Rygang, and he's kind of like a gangster that kind of goes out in a blaze of glory, like he's been wronged and he's going to go take revenge, and now he goes out in a shootout with the authorities and dies and is kind of a martyr. So that that character persists.
Yeah.
And there's also the rude
But there was
boy
sort of an
character.
incident like that in Marley's life.
Oh,
wasn't
the
it?
eye shot. Well, there was. There was the
Yeah.
assassination attempt, definitely, yeah.
Wasn't there a shootout
And
with
then
the police
he
at
sings,
some point, or-
Well, he sings about I shot the sheriff.
That's just in the song, I
And
see.
that's just, yeah, but it's
But that's part of
based
that-
on
that's
that.
part of that tradition,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And then there's the rude boy character. And that rude boy character, which was a real gangster in downtown Kingston in Jamaica.
Yeah.
A real gangster, and they were, very cool and suave, but they were very bad and murderers. But
Yeah.
it became kind of novelized throughout other forms of ska music. So in two-tone, it becomes an animated icon that's associated with the label. And then now, kind of this cool, suave sunglasses and very sharply dressed in American ska. It all comes
I've seen that.
Yeah, it comes from the gangster, the legitimate gangster in Kingston.
They probably all know one another,
Yeah.
the country, so they're all going through Kingston, right?
Yeah, I mean, Kingston, I think, culturally, Kingston was a real, it was just kind of this synergy of music that was influencing the music that came out of that time. So mento and jazz and American
Yeah.
rhythm and blues, and they were all, being influenced by at the same time, and they're very innovative.
Yeah, but like I know, if you look at the history of some of the British groups and stuff, like Paul McCartney grew up in a home
Yeah.
with, I think, a dad who had sung in some of the, whatever the British vaudeville equivalent was,
Right,
right?
right.
And so they sang at home
Right.
at night all the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Was there some kind of a tradition in Jamaica where people, sang a lot, or were there
There
a lot of church
was.
choirs? What?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that was it. So there was a strong church presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I talked to some of the women and the men, they grew up singing in the church, gospel music, things like that.
Yeah.
There was also a very strong folk tradition, and that carried over from the African slave trade. So there were work songs, and there were, play songs like, Brown Girl in the Ring and things like that. So they were, it was just part of the culture where they were singing and working at the same time and singing and
So literally
playing.
while they were working, they were
Absolutely.
singing. Well, so I'm curious about you interviewing all of these people. So you interviewed many of them in Jamaica, I assume, right?
Quite a few in Jamaica, but luckily I had a pretty cheap phone plan, and I had the Radio Shack cord I could hook up to my phone,
right.
and so I actually called quite a few of them because
It's too bad Radio Shack isn't still around, because
I
we've given them a
miss
couple
it.
good plugs
I know.
today.
I really miss it.
Yeah.
But a lot of them live in England now, and so I would just call them and ask.
I see. Well, did this ever take you anywhere that thought was kind of dangerous or was particularly interesting, or?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
tell me about that.
So I mean, Kingston's not a place to really go and just wander around.
Well, that was my impression.
Yeah, it's pretty dodgy, and it's gotten better in recent years. But when I first went, and I think it was maybe 2013 that I first went, or 2011. It's still pretty dangerous, and some of the places that I wanted to go
Yeah.
are really in bad shape now. So I wanted to go to a cemetery to see if I could find the grave of Don Drummond, who's a master trombonist. But you can't go into this cemetery, the Maypen Cemetery, without a guard.
Why is that?
So, because the gangs have taken it over.
Oh my
And so you need
gosh.
to be wearing the right color, and you need to know where not to go. And so I actually went, with the man who ran the cemetery.
Yeah.
And he was wearing the right color. But even then, I saw, I literally saw a dumpster fire. And I also, I saw some, bones and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's,
Like human bones?
Human bones, yes.
Okay.
And I went into another cemetery 3 years ago, I think, and I was chased out by a man with a machete. So it's
Wow.
not, yeah.
Do you think this earthier kind of existence is one of the reasons that the music is so stimulating?
I think you really hit on something, absolutely. Because, they talk about the talking drum, and the drum is the heartbeat, and it's the heartbeat of Africa. And there's something about that, the music being associated with the land and being associated with, just, an existence living off the earth. That's how, that's where Rastas come from, is they lived in camps in the hills and lived with the earth and were fed by the earth. And that's where the music came from too. So reggae comes from the earth.
Yeah. Well, what attracted you to it in the first place?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that because I grew up in Chesterton, Indiana, so it's a little odd. But
it's not the mecca of Jamaican music.
No, it's not. But I was living in Chicago in the mid-'90s, and that's when ska music was popular. The internet was in its infancy. I wanted to read more about the music that I was going to see at clubs, which was, American ska. And I thought, what is this music? Where is it coming from? And there was nothing in the library, and there was nothing on the internet because it was just AOL at that point.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I'm going to go find out. And so I just started talking to people and then began interviewing, and then I went down the rabbit hole. So.
Yeah, did you feel like at some point that maybe you were, getting in too deep and you were wasting your time? Did you always know that you were going to write books?
No, I didn't. I mean, I just, it wasn't, and it still isn't, anything that, sells like Harry Potter. I'll be honest with you, but it's not very lucrative.
You need to write a murder mystery about Kingston, right? And take advantage of all this.
That would be fun, but it's a labor of love. It's absolutely a labor of love, and if I'm not, writing, I don't feel like I'm really, there's some part of me that isn't fulfilled, so.
Yeah. I know one of your objectives was to bring some recognition to the women who, were basically ignored.
Right.
How, has that changed at all? I mean, do you think that they're more respected in the industry today?
Oh, I definitely do. I think as more, we find out more about the women, and now with social media and stuff, people talk about it, they share their records, they mention their contributions. I think just maybe a week or two ago, February is Reggae Month in Kingston, and the woman who gave the Bob Marley lecture, which is a big deal once a year, was a woman.
There's a Bob Marley lecture?
There's a Bob Marley lecture.
I wonder if he would have approved of that.
I think he would have.
It's a scholarly lecture on Bob Marley.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Well, and it was done by a woman who leads a very prominent record label in New York, in Brooklyn, VP Records.
Yeah.
So, I think we're getting there. I think we're getting there. And my goal in writing this book was for this book to be in libraries, so that, there was nothing in the library when I went to go read about it in 1995. Maybe a book on Bob Marley, but I wanted the women to be recognized so that when people in the future say, where were the women or who were these people, that there'll be something there.
What's your assessment of the music right now? I mean, how did we get from where you started in the 90s to here? And what do you think about it?
I have no idea.
Really?
But I mean, a lot of it is, electronic. A lot of it is,
It's more commercial?
Absolutely. They need to make money with it. But again, that was what the producers were looking at too. What's going to make money? And so I'm sure that a lot of quality was pushed aside for what was going to be popular. So it's similar in many ways.
Formulaic to some extent.
Yeah.
Because I know that's an issue. I mean, that's what ruins country for me.
Right. Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think that a lot of, the American rhythm and blues, there's a certain formula you follow too.
Yeah.
And some of the, certainly ska music can get kind of repetitive, but I think that there's enough innovation that was happening with certain people. And, there's innovation now too. I mean, Chronix is a popular recording artist, and he's doing some really innovative things. Sean Paul, there's, quite a few musicians I think that are coming out of Jamaica that, Bob Marley is definitely not the last.
Yeah.
There's some pretty good stuff coming out.
Yeah, I suppose it's true that in any genre there are artists who make it and are well paid and use their resources and their fame to kind of go off in new directions and things. And
they do. Yeah, they do. And, and luckily too, enough of the Jamaican musicians are giving back to new artists too. So they're funding new studios. One of them at Alpha Boys School, I know Sean Paul had made a large donation so that the boys there can learn the recording industry. So they're trying to help support what is coming out of their own country too.
Yeah.
I think what you'll find, and this has been true for ska music since day one is that there's a real camaraderie. A scamaraderie, if you will.
Yeah.
And
Right,
it's
yeah, scamaraderie,
yeah,
that's good.
it's like a family. It's like a family. So if you come in, you know, there's different kinds of ska music, more traditional, like the Jamaican stuff, but then things where it's fused with other genres too.
Yeah.
So it's a good time.
Well, that's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Heather for joining me today on
you.
Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.